listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined with my friend Kimberly Haliburda. She is a medium, Reiki practitioner, Akashic Records reader, and spiritual life coach. She is also an expert at candle intention work, an animal communicator, and energy manipulator. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to meet you in person.
Well, it's wonderful to meet you as well. You have a very, very nice space.
Thank you. I put a lot into it. So for those who don't know you, could you share a little background on yourself and how and when you discovered that you were a medium?
Yeah. So as briefly as I can put it, so I'm an intuitive medium. I do energy work, as you mentioned in your intro, and I communicate with animals and kind of have a wide variety in my wheelhouse of various, I guess, metaphysical things that I partake in, whether it's energy manipulation or energetic healing with humans and animals, and so on and so forth. But I think the most important thing to note about me whenever it comes to the metaphysical is that I don't really remember a time in which I wasn't highly, highly intuitive. That made, early childhood life a bit difficult. But the earliest experience that I remember is whenever I was, and it was quite tragic also, whenever I was 6, my mother, she passed away of a brain aneurysm. She was only 39. And whenever she slipped into a coma, she was in a coma for a few months before she passed. I was the one who, I was told by whatever that I needed to wake up. And it wasn't like I really heard a voice. I just knew that I needed to wake up. So I woke up out of a dead sleep. And I ran into our middle bedroom. And, my mom was very, very hot. And I could feel her body like hanging just above, or her soul hanging above her body. And I thought, well, if I can just pull her back in, then she'll be okay. But, I'm a 6-year-old and like, I can't do that, So the best thing I can do is, get her medical help and wake up my grandparents and get her to a hospital, which is what I did. But that's the first metaphysical experience that I remember. I probably had some earlier in life that I don't necessarily remember as vividly, but that one really, really stood out. Obviously because it was, it was my mom, but to experience seeing and feeling someone's soul not inside of their body is it can be quite rattling. In this instance, it was, it was just so vivid. And it's something that whenever I look back, I remember it in detail. Mm-hmm. So that was probably my first significant metaphysical experience. It was a weird childhood. And, there are certain things that are very they're very strange to talk about with other people whenever you talk about having, spiritual experiences or metaphysical experiences and whatever. And some people look at you like you're nuts, and you're like, after a certain point when you're older, you can say, okay, well, that's fine that you think that about me. But,
right.
But whenever you're really little, it's very different when you're a small child and you really just want to have friends and get along with people and have people accept you. Mm-hmm. You can't say, hey,
right,
something told me to wake up in the middle of the night when my mom went into a coma.
Right.
So you can't just tell people that when you're little. And so that was a difficult lesson to learn.
Yeah. I had something similar. My older stepbrother passed away when I was in 7th grade, and I was asleep when it happened because it was 2:00 in the morning. Okay. Oh. And so I'm asleep, and I somehow was remote viewing the entire experience. I was in the car. I was and then when the event happened, it woke me up, and I was like, oh my, oh my God. And the thing is it was on the scanner, and somehow my mother got the information pretty quickly and like ran in my room, and I was like, oh my God, and like,
Oh,
I told
no.
her the story like before she told me, and it made me feel so like, she was like, oh, like that's weird. And then
Oh.
like there was a point where I told some people at school about it, and I was just like forever the weird girl to them, and I was like,
Oh.
I can't tell people about this. But that, just like you, it was like, it was kind of traumatic in the sense that it's like, I can't share this. I don't really want to keep having these kind of experiences. And it did kind of dial back, but I would still get like weird premonitions about things.
Yeah. Oh,
where
yeah.
I was like, but it wouldn't be like someone talking to me, and I wouldn't be there. It would just be like, I would be driving in the car, I would look over, and in the trees I would see a vision. And then that I would go to a store and like look at a newspaper and be like, holy crap, that's what I saw. But it wasn't like I was immersed into it like the remote viewing, which was kind of more frightening,
Yeah.
So it's like, I understand like you don't necessarily want to share it with everybody when you're little like that.
Well, because I think it's so hard. Childhood's such a difficult time anyway, and just wanting to be accepted. It's very hard to be accepted whenever you say, hey, I have these premonitions, or hey, I get this feeling, about you or like your friend or whatever. And even though you might get certain feelings, or you might want to either like tell someone something really great's going to happen, or you might want to warn them about something, sometimes it's better just to let people live their lives and just
Right.
not say anything at all. Not necessarily that I knew how to articulate that when I was 6, because I didn't.
Right.
I just knew that I saw something very odd and that it was scary.
Right.
And so how old were you whenever that happened with your stepbrother?
I was in 7th grade at that point, but I
Okay, so you're a little older.
I had things, my first out of body experience was at 4.
Oh, okay.
Where I was starting to astral project or lucid dream. But the thing is I was also seeing beings of light, but I was like awake at that time. Right.
Gotcha.
And I wasn't seeing them in my dreams at all. It was actually during some like abusive, traumatic things.
Oh.
And they would be there for that. But I was very much awake at that point.
Like spirit guides.
Right.
That's interesting.
Right. And that started really young, but the lucid dreaming kind of never stopped,
Yeah.
And I just assumed that everybody was like really great at it. And like everyone, like when
No.
they dreamed, like they could like go places and talk to people and like bring back information. And
They can't.
so, but eventually, I was like, okay, these things that are happening, these experiences are for me. And like, I don't necessarily have to tell everybody, because like people would think you're crazy, or they would just be like, oh yeah, have a really big imagination or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just kind of look at you and say, oh, well, that's the weird girl. Or
I know. And I've always been the weird girl.
So it's like my brain. Yeah.
So it's like, you don't want to just be that forever. And now I've like accepted it, that I'm unique. I'm Aquarius rising. I got most unique in high school. Like I've always been.
Sparkle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it took me a while to just be okay with that, because I did want to be accepted. I wanted to be a part of my little community of people or whatever. But, we do what we can to get by,
Yeah, absolutely. You do what you can to get by. And sometimes drawing less attention to yourself is better. But it's funny because I say this and we're doing a podcast and we're like, hey, you want to talk about our weird experiences?
Right. Well, this is what this podcast is based around.
Exactly.
That. So it's like, it's a place where people can talk about those things.
Exactly.
And so many people will reach out and be like, oh my gosh, I had something similar. And just hearing someone else share that makes me feel seen and just accepted, because like I was the weird person in my, community. So it's like we all come together, and it's like, well, there's, I guess it's like 10% of the population has these weird experiences, but we don't have other people to talk to about them. So we feel isolated in those,
I think every person goes through an experience and they have to look back and they're like, did I see this or did I not? And memory is funny because, our brain, the way it works is if we can't fully remember something, then it fills in the spaces.
Right.
And that's why you can be talking to somebody who was also there and they might remember, oh, it was a red truck. And you're like, no, I'm pretty sure it was a blue sedan. Right. And let's say that, the person you're talking to is correct. And you're like, oh, I wonder why I thought it was that. Like we all go through these experiences. We have to wonder, okay, well, did we really see this or experience this? But sometimes you have something that's so rock solid and that's so like it's just so real, and you're so immersed in the experience. It's like, how can you say it's like, you and I sitting here right now. Will I remember that this sofa is like, yellow,
Right.
like 10 years from now? Well, probably not, maybe not. But will I remember that we had this experience and I was on this
Right.
podcast and we talked? Yeah, I mean, probably.
Right.
So memory is weird like that.
But you don't forget how the experience made you feel.
And then you have
know.
you have a lot of, I think anyone who's very spiritually open, has a lot of experiences throughout their life that they look back on like that, because it's not just I don't think it's just a single experience. I think you just
Right.
kind of continue to have these sort of things happen, and then you're like, huh, okay, well, this was similar to this, and
Right.
what does that mean? And then maybe it turns out that your gift is, mediumship later on, or
Right.
you're really good at astrology or whatever it is, right? And I think that just throughout your life you sort of figure out what it is that you're really good at,
Right.
and why you had those really early experiences.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think everybody kind of has a weird thing they can't fully explain. But you do what you can, and you try your best, and
Right.
whatever.
And some people block it out and move on with their life.
And they're like,
whatever, that's fine.
fuck it. Right?
If that's how you want to live, that's cool too. So I don't ever try to like convince people of anything anymore. I'm like,
No.
that's your experience. That's cool.
That's fine. Yeah. And yeah, no, I totally understand that entirely. Yeah.
So what are some of your abilities that you have now that you know of?
So I do a little bit of everything. As I was stating earlier, it's not like any one particular thing, but so I'll start with, okay, how I receive messages is, it's not so much that someone talks to me. It's not so much that I have a spirit guide that like there's like audio in my ear that's like, hey, this, and this,
Right.
like this, and this has happened. It's more of, I get a lot of visuals. So I see a lot of symbols, but I don't see them as if I'm seeing like you or like the artwork on the walls or whatever. I see them in my head. And well, people would say, well, that's a big imagination. And I'm like, well, until I can describe exactly what somebody else's, like parent looks like, or
Right.
whatever, they give me a name and I'm like, hey, like I read for you yesterday. I didn't even know that I was going to do that when we were on the phone. And I'm like, hey, this person looks like this and they're about this tall. And I think they have kind of this problem. And this is their
Right.
relationship with this other person. And I can go into a lot of detail, and it gets basically endless if I want to go that far.
Right.
And I can just sort of pick up on the energy of the person and be able to, it's almost like, it's like if you were to say a flow chart of, let's say we're looking at, this person and they have a dog, and then I'll get what the dog thinks. And then maybe they have a cat and I'll get what the cat thinks. And maybe they have like a mom, like their mom or their dad or whatever. And then I'll say, okay, but this is kind of influencing their opinion on whatever's going on in the original, like person A's life, right?
Right.
Like whether it's a relationship or, having a new child or whatever it is. And I know that sounds very abstract, because it is really abstract until I'm looking at all these different relationships and I'm literally able to say, hey, this person looks like this. This is
Right.
what they look like. This is, here are like some of their personality traits. They're very sweet and kind, or they're kind of an asshole, or whatever,
Right,
whatever it is,
yeah.
or they have a problem with drugs, or whatever it is. And I'm able to do that. So it's not so much that anyone talks to me. I just, and I know it sounds really cliche when people say, well, I just know things. Well, I don't just like, and okay. Am I right all the time? No, I'm not, because I'm still a human being and I get things, and sometimes, I'm not right. I don't think anyone, no matter how intuitive you are, can be right all the time. I think everybody has the ability through free will and their own volition to change energies and change situations. I don't think anything is necessarily set in stone. I don't think whenever you get a reading, if you have 3 or 4 psychics telling you close to the same thing, well, maybe something similar to that will happen. That's very likely. But a lot of where my messages come from, people say like the divine, whatever. I know it sounds cheesy, but we all have spirit guides. We all have a divine team. I guess that's where it comes from. I don't know. I just know what I see. I know what I get. I know what I feel. I know the messages that I receive. And I haven't really had very many experiences where somebody said, oh, that's not me. Or
Right.
I'll describe some people who are really close to like their brother or their partner or whatever. And I won't be describing them. I'll be describing that person specifically. And then I'll think that person is the actual person I'm talking to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's weird. I just kind of, it's just kind of there.
Right, like clear cognizance in a way, just sort of an understanding, or it's seeing in your mind's eye.
Lots of,
Would be like
that's a good way to
clairvoyance.
put, yeah, lots of that. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of visuals.
Yeah.
Lots of visuals. But here, not,
Right. I know it's
not
so hard
outward.
to explain that to people sometimes. I'm like, I don't actually see it like right next to you.
But you just see
I
it.
can, it's in my mind's eye. I can,
Yeah.
see the aura in my mind's eye.
Like I had a friend, she does my hair, and she's a wonderful person, and we were talking, and she's a medium too, but she kind of keeps that a secret, so I'm not going to mention her name. But we were talking about a family member of hers, and I was looking, and I kept seeing this big, like, red, like it looked like a bomb. And I was like, why am I seeing that? But it didn't look like it was out being dropped. It looked like it was in a building. And well, that person worked in nuclear for the government.
Wow.
And so I was like, what am I seeing? Because it was like it was just standing, but like in a big building. And it was just like cartoonish looking, right? And so I don't always see something as specific as what it is.
Right.
I didn't see the words, like I didn't see nuclear. I didn't see words, because sometimes I see words, but most of the time I receive visuals. And I saw this rocket, and I was like, well, what did they do? And when she said, well, they worked in nuclear, it was like,
Right.
like nuclear engineering. And I thought, oh, that person made bombs.
Right.
And they work for the government. I mean, we live around Oak Ridge too, so, it's not that big of a leap. But it was just that it was so specific.
Right. And even though you might not understand, like, why am I getting this image? When you say it to the person, they'll be like, oh, yes, totally. Because and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
that's why I'm seeing it then,
Exactly. And sometimes people won't come to me, like those who've passed over, they don't necessarily come to me the way they looked whenever they passed, like in like if somebody comes in for a reading and they ask about their grandma or something. And like I had this one girl who asked about her grandma, and I just kept seeing the color purple, and I said, I see a purple boa and a purple shirt, and like her like her background, like the background of the photo was very 80s, but it was all purple. And she was like, well, that's the photo in my living room, in my family's living room. And it was like, oh, cool. It's like, oh, that's cool. And so it's not always as specific as that. Sometimes it's the person, sometimes it's the person whenever they were, like in the military, and they have on, their outfit, or they have like badges or whatever, and I'll describe that. And so anything that I call like a qualifier, anything to qualify that it is the person that they've asked about, it's not what I seek, it's just what comes to me.
Right.
So that's kind of how I receive. And whenever I'm just straight up doing readings, and can I use cards and stuff? That's fine. I think, using tarot visual aids, that's great. But something that can't give me that, guides can, right? That I can just kind of get on my own, or with whoever is helping me. If I don't know.
Right.
But I don't necessarily get names all the time, but or even a lot of the time, but I get a lot of visuals,
Right.
and I get a lot of feelings, and I understand whenever I see numbers, kind of what that means, because I'll get ages. Like
Right,
what we
right.
talked about yesterday. I was
Yeah.
able to break down like this person's age and this person's age, and
Yeah.
like, because I see them.
Uh-huh.
So whatever that is.
Right.
And
I feel like that's clairvoyance, because it is kind of coming in different ways. So sometimes
Lots
it
of
might be
ways.
visual, sometimes it might be a knowing, sometimes it might, I smell.
oh no, I smell too. I get smells.
Right. It's
I get
not
smells.
every
Yeah.
time. Like, but the thing is I don't always know how it's gonna happen, and I don't even consider myself a psychic, but I'm getting all the time weird information, and in the
Yeah.
records now, when I'm in the records, it's all sorts of
Well,
stuff.
you can feel and you can hear, like if you're looking back, which is really interesting, because I didn't start doing any kind of past life anything till like this last year. And sometimes whenever you look back, you can hear the sound of people walking on like cobblestone, for instance.
Right, and that gives you kind of an idea of like maybe
Of like where they are, and then you
Yes.
sort of look around, so then you put yourself in that town or whatever it
Yeah.
is, right? Like this little village, and there's like cobblestone streets or whatever the hell you're hearing, and you're like, you just kind of look around and you try to see things that are familiar, things that would
Right.
indicate like what time period it is.
Yes.
And so from there you can kind of say, okay, well, this was this life. What was another one? And I don't spend too much time doing that. I think it's fascinating. Will I at some point get more into past life things? Probably. I just think it's so cool to just sort of do the here and now.
Right.
It's
right.
just so much fun. And honestly, would I be that great of a past life reader? I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, I would probably be pretty sufficient, I guess, if I really got into it. What I've discovered so far is that I'm pretty good at that. But I don't know if that's necessarily my specialty, but I do think it's fascinating.
Right.
I do like the sounds when you go to past life stuff, because I don't always get sounds in the present when I'm looking at something presently, but I do if I'm looking at past life stuff. Yeah.
Right.
That's a big thing. And I do get like touch, stuff like that. I used to get nosebleeds when I was in a really active place. Don't so much anymore. And I get a lot of feelings. But whenever I do, and we'll talk about this in a little bit too, when we talk about Reiki and energy work, I'm by no means a doctor or any kind of medical professional. I always think somebody should go see a medical professional if they have any kind of issue, right? But whenever I work on a person, body parts just light up. They just light up like just bright white, and it could be somebody's knees or their gallbladder or whatever. I'll get images, like sometimes of like a wheat or a milk if somebody's like lactose intolerant or gluten intolerant or whatever, right? So there's visuals, but there's also body parts that will light up, and I'll kind of see sometimes like, I don't know, like movement, like an energy movement. There's a word for it. I can't remember. It starts with an S. It's like, okay, so you know how like the clouds will kind of like wisp and move and stuff. I see that sometimes in people's like intestinal tracts, and it just depends on what I'm working on and what's going on with that person. So I get a lot of that. Very intuitive people, I see like, their heads kind of, this sounds weird. It's not gruesome. It's not like a horror movie. They're kind of like open, but they have like gold or white or whatever. It's just really bright and beautiful. It's really interesting. So,
So after we got off the phone yesterday, I haven't told you this yet. You said something about my knee. Okay.
yeah.
And I was like, okay, knee. Because I know that I struggle because of some of the ancestral stuff with the knees, because that's the stability and things like that. And
especially the left one, I think.
So like a few hours after we talked, I was just like threw myself in the bed casually, whatever, just like wasn't paying attention to the way my body was landing. And my husband had just left, and my knee locked up, and I was like, oh my God, it won't straighten. But like, it's so weird because we just talked about it, and I hadn't had that happen in probably like a year.
Oh no.
But it's weird because it has happened. Like the first time it happened, I was in preschool. And like, it's actually been like, it probably happens 2 or 3 times a year my whole life, but it hadn't happened in a while. And I was like, what are the odds that you just brought awareness to my knee? And then I was like literally sitting there, and I'm like almost laughing at myself. Like, I feel like she predicted this, but like we didn't know how it was going to manifest. You just brought the knee up. And then I was like, this is so weird right now that this is happening. But yeah, you're spot on. There was, I guess, tension in my knee, and it decided to lock up 5 hours after I got off the phone.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And not to get into it now because I know it's personal stuff, but I think it has a lot to do with the things that we talked about yesterday. And it just was kind of, it just sort of lit up for me. And it's weird to say, oh, I see people and then their body parts light up. I don't know how else to explain that. I don't know how else to put it. I just know it's bright, white. And so I know to pay attention to that area.
Right.
And so whenever we were getting off the phone, I knew you were getting tired because I could just hear it in your voice. I was like, gosh, this is too much information for this girl right now. We're going to have to go. And I was like, oh, but that knee though.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just, I guess, confirmation.
Right.
Like, well, this person is picking up on this. And we talked about a lot of other things like your migraines, things like that. And so again, I'm not any kind of like, am I a medical intuitive? I guess.
Right.
Sure. I'm not a healthcare professional. I just see certain things, and that typically resonates
Right.
with the person that I'm talking to. And also, if I'm around somebody who is really sick, now I don't say anything because you got to let people live their lives.
Right.
It's not my job to go around saying you have cancer and you have cancer.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
not what I'm about. I'm going to do that. That's awful. But if I'm around somebody who has any kind of serious problems, not only will they light up, but my hands get really hot, both of them, and they don't just get hot, they will turn like pink, like a pinky red, and they will burn a lot. If I'm around a person who, and I mean, I do a lot of protection and things, but if I'm around somebody that has serious medical problems, that does tend to happen. And
Right.
I tend to shut that off. Like if I go into Target, because I'm like, oh, my palm's burning all the time.
Right. Right.
But if I'm sort of doing something casual, spending time, like with family or whatever, sometimes it's like, oh, well, this person's having this kind of flare up, or does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's just kind of, it's very strange how that happens.
Uh-huh.
And typically whenever they burn, it could be right around the time if somebody's just had like a minor surgery or something like that I won't
Right.
know about.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, it's sometimes people also going through a lot of emotional stuff will kind of trigger that too. Like, if there's a death or something like that, sometimes that happens as well. So, or I'll just say, sometimes I'll just say to my guides, like let this person be aware and let them get the help that they need.
Right.
Sometimes I don't say anything because I just don't think it's my place to say things most of the time.
Yeah. I've hit that too with doing some readings here and there where I'm like, I think this might be something for me to know about them, as far as like I might hold that space for them, but I don't know if I have to verbally say this. I think it's just like an understanding, so I can, if they bring it up, then
Yes.
then I go into
Yes.
that. But if they don't bring it up, I'm like, okay, I don't know why you're telling me this, but they usually do end up bringing it up.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, well, that makes more sense. Why this was this word came out or whatever.
Exactly.
So what's an intuitive reading with you like? What are some things people can expect?
Well, I don't know, Astral. Why don't you explain? You just had one yesterday.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for the audience, but yeah, it was so much. Like you were just like you said, information overload, but it's good though. I went and I was like explaining it to my husband, and then I'd be like 30 minutes later, and be like, oh, and then she said. But it was like it took me like a few hours to process it, but it was really wild how you were describing things or body parts or experiences and things like that, but you were really like you were straightforward yet gentle in your approach of relaying certain information.
Yes.
If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. You have to be really careful because sometimes people are not prepared to hear certain things. And also, again, I can't stress this enough. It's not like I am not correct all of the time. I'm still a human being.
Right.
It's not like I think I'm special because I don't. I just do this kind of stuff. And I try to stay very humble about it because I think if I didn't, I would be a real asshole. I think anytime you I get like all this information and I give people these very specific readings. And so readings with me, they're not vague. They're very specific. And if I hit a wall, I will tell a person that I can't read them. I've only had that happen once. And then she was also very intuitive and had blocked out a lot of things because they were traumatizing for her. And we talked about it. And then everything was like the floodgates opened, right? And I was able to describe anything that she was asking about. So sometimes people will say, well, tell me what I need to hear. And then I kind of tell them what they need to hear. Like, well, like I see this relationship going on that's not necessarily very healthy for you, et cetera.
Right.
But I think for the most part, a reading with me is what you can expect is I will try to be very, very gentle if I think it's information that a person can't handle at that moment. And I try to be very, very aware of trauma because there's a lot of things that light up just bright, like literally like just red. And or I will get the feeling like, oh, I absolutely can't say this. Or somebody will come to me and say, don't say that. Not necessarily that I hear it audibly, but I just know, like they're saying, don't go there. But it's not like I I'm not vague. I can quite literally, thankfully, and I don't know if this will always be the case, but I'm able to get pretty specific. I'm able to see very, very detailed situations and relationships. And again, am I right all the time? No, but there's some pretty interesting experiences that I've had where, because for a while it was like, oh, I was struggling with imposter syndrome. And then I just kept having these experiences, and just over and over and over again, where I was able to describe something that, if I went to someone and they described that to me, I'd be like, oh my goodness, like this person is like fantastic right there, this amazing reader. But it's, I guess what you could say is it would probably be a fairly unique experience. I don't know. Would you say that?
It was definitely unique and different. I haven't had too many psychic readings. Like I've had people that do energy work that will have like some information.
Yeah.
So yours was just like a lot of information. It wasn't
God,
just
it's so
like,
much.
right. It wasn't like a casual, like I pulled an energy block here. It was just, it's like streaming.
I could have went on forever about it. Mostly because I talk too much, but, but yeah. And then some days, just like anyone else, sometimes I don't feel well and I'm like,
right.
I'm not doing it. I'm not reading anybody. I'm not doing any of it. And sometimes I'll throw it out to the universe. Like, I'm not going to do readings for the next 6 months or whatever it is, and just give myself a break. But for the most part, I'd say it's pretty detailed, and I try to be just as gentle as I can. And I think at the end of the day, I have a friend who's this fantastic intuitive. His name is Scott Vaughn, and he said, well, people stand a little inaccuracy as long as you love them. If you just really take that time to love a person, that's the most important thing. And I think that as human beings, we all just want to be heard, and we want to be loved, and we want to be seen. There's a reason people make sure they smile in photos, is because we want to be seen. We want to be seen as these, like good, happy, beautiful beings, right? And so I think there's a lot of importance and truth to that, in which if you're just, even if you don't give somebody all the information that they really want, whether you have the information or you don't, on the, I guess the assumption that you're correct. The most important thing is to be very, very kind and very loving whenever you bring that information out, and be very aware, being very, very aware that PTSD is a thing. And if you say something that somebody's not prepared to hear, especially like a victim of abuse, that can ruin that person's whole month.
Right.
That can just wreck that person. So you have to be very careful, and you really just need to take the time to love people. And I say this while also being fairly misanthropic, honestly, but but I know you get that too.
Yeah.
But like, just take the time to say, okay, well, you came to me and you came to me for this reason. And,
right.
And so I'm going to love you in this moment and give you what you need to hear, and nothing more and nothing less.
Meet you where you're at.
Yeah. Meet the person where they're at. I think that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. So how did your abilities and metaphysical experiences affect your own personal religious or spiritual views?
So I can think of one very, very specific thing. In general, I was never, and I want to be very, very clear, I don't, knock anybody's religion at all. I think it's, well, as long as they're not being hateful and, imposing upon the rights of other people and their right to exist, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all very important things to keep in mind. But whenever I was, I don't know, like 16-ish, I kind of had this moment in time when I was like, I'd grown up always feeling like I never really wanted anything to do with the church. Not that, that was necessarily a good or a bad thing at that point in my life. It was just more of like, well, I'm just not really interested because I've had, some of these experiences. And even though I blocked out a lot of things, I kind of came into this world knowing like, well, and not that we really need to, or not that I could talk about reincarnation forever. So I'm not going to go there. But I kind of knew I knew that, well, this is my first rodeo, right? Like, this is not, like, I've been here before. My dogs have been here before. My grandparents have been here before. And hey, everybody, like,
Right.
hi again, right? And so I never was quite on board with the whole you die, and if you're not perfect, then you burn in eternal flames forever, and it really sucks a lot.
Yeah.
Everything sucks. You can't be happy. Are you smiling? You're going to hell. And I don't mean to make it sound like because not all Christians believe anything like that. I have several friends who are wonderful, beautiful, enlightened, very intelligent, very open, just fantastic people in my life who are also very, very devoutly Christian. And I think that is wonderful. But I grew up in a little shitty town, in a very rural town, that had a serious meth problem, that affected just about everybody in that town. And it was a bad time. And so, and also there were a lot of like very, very stringently religious people.
Right.
And I lived, just really close to a church. And I just remember kind of walking in and thinking, well, this really isn't my jam, like, I don't know how I feel about this. And, I remember questioning that when I was like 16, 17-ish. And I had called a pastor and was like, as much as I really want to believe this, I just cannot do it. And I didn't explain any of my metaphysical experiences. I just said, hey, I really can't do it. And it was the church that was really close by to me. It was a Methodist church. And he was like, well, here's the thing is I could sit here and I could tell you all day long, like, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. But unless you believe it, then there's no point in even talking. And I thought, that's actually like the best advice
Right.
that I've heard when talking to any person who's heavily involved with the church. It was not hateful. It was like, well, this is what I believe. And if you don't believe it, you don't believe it. That's all there is to it. I'm not going to be hateful to you. I'm just going to say, well, you have to make your own path, right? Not that he said that specifically, but, you can infer. And so I remember asking, I just said out loud, I said, hey, if I'm supposed to go, to hell for believing in any kind of metaphysical thing that doesn't have to do with God or angels, etc., then okay, like then I don't know what to do because I've had all these experiences. And I was literally just saying this out loud. I was like, well, why would I go to hell for having these experiences and seeing these things and feeling other beings that I know have not been described by the church, right? Because also my grandparents were, well, my grandmother specifically is very religious, but she was never hateful about it. She was never oppressive. And my grandpa was atheist. So like, there was, both worlds. And I'm just kind of here being like this weird, interesting child and not really knowing what to think. And so I just kind of asked out loud, like, well, what do I believe in? Like, am I going to rot in hell forever for just not going to church? And later that night I had this dream, and it was like, now I realize like it was my whole spiritual counsel, because there were these people that I did recognize who were loved ones who had passed. And then all these other people who were like there, and I didn't know any of them.
Right.
And there were like 20 or 30 of them. And they were all, it almost looked like stadium seating. And I was kind of in the middle in the front. And my grandma, she had passed away. No, it was right around. It was right around the time that she was about to pass away. Yeah, because she passed away when I was 18. It had to have been like 17, actually almost 18. So I was a little older. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it. And she came and she was like, as long as you're a good person, nothing bad is going to happen to you. Stop worrying. And it was like I had an uncle that I love very much that had passed away, and there were all these people there, and the general consensus was like, live your life and don't worry about being perfect, and just do what you think is best and be a good person, and you're fine.
Right.
And so I just rolled with it. And it's not that I think I'm this, incredible human being. It's that, you do your best, and sometimes that looks different on different days, but hell, you try every day. And I don't think that any less than that is going to get you a ticket to some kind of eternal punishment.
Right.
You know, and also the very devout Christians that I'm close with, they don't think that either. They think the whole key is being a good person. It's like everybody fucks up. We all have the human experience. Like, what would be the point in life if we didn't have mistakes that we had to learn from, right? So I know that's very long-winded, but basically,
Yeah.
I was like, hey, this kind of sucks. Am I going to go to hell forever? And then later that night I had a dream like, no,
Right.
you won't. Just be a good person. That's what you can do. You'll
Right.
be fine.
Right.
And I was like, all right. And I just rolled with that ever since. I was like, well.
Right. I feel like when we ask those questions, like our higher self does respond, whether through a dream or you'll meet a person that day that will say the thing that you really just need to hear,
Yeah.
you know? So it's like if you're seeking it, like that understanding, you know, comes to you. So that's
Yeah.
really cool that you were able to have that experience. And
Yeah.
it just takes all the fear away and then you can just live your life. Right?
Yeah.
Without just being like wondering this one question forever. It's like, well, I got my answer. And now I can just experience my life however I want. I'm not going to hell.
Yeah.
So, you know?
No.
So, when did you first delve into energy manipulation, and what are some ways that you work with it?
Okay. So this is going to make me sound like I don't know, a 90s child. So
I'm a 90s child too.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So whenever I was like, I don't know, I think I was 12. I have an older sister, she's 10 years older than me, and she introduced me to tarot cards, and I was like, well, this is really interesting and all, but you know, I didn't know how much I wanted to delve into that at that point. But you know, she would talk about like candle work, and the big thing was like, ooh, change your eye color with candles, and like, you know, none of that shit worked, because how could it change something physically like that?
Right.
It's one thing to change energy, but you know, you're not going to change your eye color with candle magic. Geez. But I thought that was really interesting, but it had me thinking, well, if people think that they can do that, well, couldn't you just burn a candle and then think really hard about something and then just make that thing happen? And so that sort of led to energy manipulation in a much larger way when I was older. And it was like, well, okay, we're going to sell this house and we need this much money for it. There we go. It's done 2 weeks later and we got $50,000 more than I asked for, you know, whatever. And so, you know, can you say, oh, well, this specifically happened because of candle work? No, I mean, you really can't. But I've had, oh goodness, I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times, I mean, just countless things that I've said, hey, I would like this to happen. Or this is going to happen, and I'm just going to shift the energy. And then it did. And it's not like we have control over everything, but I think we have control over a lot. And I think as far as just being on a human level, on a very physical instead of metaphysical level, if you seek out to do something, well, there's a better chance that it's going to occur than if you were like, well, I'm just, you know, I want this to happen, but I'm going to do shit about it.
Right. You're not putting any intention into it.
Yeah. And so an intention comes in many forms, whether you're looking for a new job, or arguing with your boss about, well, I hate to say arguing, but, you know, trying to convince your boss to give you better pay, whatever. If you don't try, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of power, even if it's just you sitting down and just saying, this is going to occur. It's going to occur because I say so. Well, after a while, maybe that turns into a pattern for some people. I know it certainly did with me. And you can just kind of manifest things that you would. God, it sounds so cheesy to say manifest. Everybody talks about manifesting, but that's quite literally what it is.
Right.
You just sort of bend and manipulate energy into what would be best for you, or you know, you can ask for what they call right action and the best of the situation for everybody within a particular situation. So it's a little convoluted of an answer, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's as good a one as I can give you.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, it's happened enough times. It's like, well, you know, you can kind of expect it to work.
Right. Yeah.
That's my personal belief anyway.
I do feel like there's something about fire, you know, lighting the candle that sort of helps with that alchemy of things, like the fire is kind of initiating it in general, so
Yeah.
you spark it, you set the intention, and then you spark that candle, and now here we go.
And then you burn it down, and,
Yeah.
and you let it kind of release out into the universe, and you try not to, pull the energy back by talking about it,
Right.
things like that. And then sometimes I know a lot of people will do like candle wax readings. Mine get very, very specific. Sometimes when I was really struggling, there have been times whenever I've really, really struggled with migraine, like my candle would burn down and it would kind of look like a brain. And then I had like an MRI like a month later, and it was like, well, all right then, thanks for telling me that.
Right.
So that was interesting. And I found sometimes I've gotten so comfortable with it. This is going to sound very chaotic. It's very haphazard, but I'll just be doing whatever, and I'll be like making breakfast in the morning. I'll have a candle lit, and I'll say, okay, well, I need this, and this to happen. And so like I remember I was cooking eggs, and my eggs turned into like they looked like lungs, like very specifically. And then it was a few months later, but my partner got really sick with pneumonia, and I remember, well, that was a warning, but it was a warning while I was doing something about other. Like I was setting intentions about other health work. I think that was actually a time whenever I was working on migraine as well. And so I've become acutely aware of like, if I'm doing something and something becomes an image, without getting caught up in the everything means something, and more so if it does mean something, then it will make itself obvious
Right.
and known.
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily think there's meaning in all things. But I think whenever there is a meaning in something, it's pretty obvious.
Like you feel it. You're just like, this is standing out for a reason.
Yeah.
In that moment. But not everything always stands out. Right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of things that just drive right by us that we're not even paying attention to. But when it does stand out, I feel like then why is it getting our attention?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's like there's lots of deers in the world, but whenever there's 3 in my front yard, and I'm like,
Right.
interesting. Why are you guys hanging out here? You're never here. What's up with that? And then you kind of think about, okay, well, what does a deer symbolize, and so on and so forth. And I think whenever they're obvious symbols, you can look for meanings in that, and kind of use your own intuition to kind of break it down. I think a lot of people get those kinds of confirmations or that kind of symbolism or whatever, and because anybody's going to stop and say, oh, there were these deer hanging out here, or there was a big hawk on top of my car this morning, something really odd, and maybe not everybody thinks, oh, there's something more to that, but I do believe that nature really tries to show itself through. So I know that's very off topic of the question about candle intention work, but it's still
it's still guidance coming from
yeah
some other form, or maybe the validation you need, like especially if you have a question and then an owl flies by as you're asking the question
and you're like, well, okay,
okay.
That's interesting. That might be a difficult one. I don't know why owls sometimes they bring such, I don't know. It's people see owls and they bring such mystery to things, but whenever I see an owl, there's always something really weird that happens psychically. It's not like it's not always like a really good thing or a really bad thing. It's just kind of weird.
Right. Something to just like make note of and like look around and see what's going on in that.
Sometimes, or like, getting close to getting into a car accident, something like that. It's almost like, it kind of reminds me of like close calls. To look out for them. So that's interesting that you brought up owls, because that's one that I've noticed that's kind of like a warning for me anyway.
Right, like an omen versus like a clarification.
Yeah, well, and sometimes they can be clarification. Sometimes they can be like the symbol of, hey, your intuition is on board and you are doing well and you are on this path you're supposed to be on. But it kind of makes itself known.
Right.
What certain things tend to symbolize, like we talked about shooting stars yesterday.
Yeah.
Whenever you're feeling really, really, really awful and you see a shooting star, well, that's like a universally pretty good symbol, I think.
Right,
anyway.
hang in there.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
I mean, it may be other cultures. I don't know. I'm ignorant to other meanings, I suppose. But for the most part, I think like there's a general consensus that shooting stars are like a very positive thing. Yeah, hang in there. Things are going to be cool. Chill. You'll get through this thing, right?
It's just, if you're looking for it, you can find it. you know, and I think that the universe is always sending us little synchronicities or little guidance or cues or just things. And
Yeah.
if you're kind of making note of it, they all start to make a little bit more sense. But
Makes
if you're
sense,
just
yeah.
like not even seeking it, you're not going to notice. You're like, yeah, there's a deer, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
but
I gotta get to work, whatever. It's like I'm running late. Fuck it.
right.
Yeah.
But I think if you're like trying to be more mindful and you are seeking something, then, you know, maybe that's just the validation you need at that moment.
Yeah.
You know? So,
I think so.
so how does being an intuitive affect your daily life, and what are some like daily practices for you?
So the biggest thing I think is I have to be very, very careful about protecting myself. And okay, so as far as it affects my daily life, do I see all things coming in my life? No, I'm still a human being and I still have lessons. And again, I'm not right all the time. I have a pretty decent track record, but I don't always see things in my life, and I don't always necessarily look either.
Right. You want to be surprised sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I am. Like, I look at the transits, but I don't always try to like come up with some story with a transit. I might just keep it as like in my awareness and then see what happens without trying to like predict anything. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. You know, I just allow. Okay, I'm going to document this experience and see what it feels like.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's a really good way to go about it as well. Whenever you are keeping up with transits, which is something I totally don't do, and probably should do. But probably very handy whenever you're making, you know, decisions, especially like financial decisions and so on. So I think that the biggest thing that the way it affects me is because I could just talk forever. I tend to, well, not necessarily anymore, but I used to attract people who would want to talk to me. And I know you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you almost did an eye roll. you just, I know you understand. And I don't necessarily, want to, for as much as I talk, I don't necessarily want to, you know, have to stop every time I go into a store and talk to a person. I had a very strange experience with a lady at Target that it was wild, and I don't want to fully go into it. It was very strange. And she just could not stop talking to me. And it put me in a really awkward position socially. And, you know, I'm trying to get home and it was raining really hard outside. And I just kind of wanted to be done with the conversation. And but she kept asking me questions, and it's like, well, I don't do readings for free and on the fly. I mean, I could, but I just don't. Like, why? You know, because I need boundaries and I need space. And I have shit I have to do too.
And your time's valuable.
You know, I was like, if I'm going in for like paper towels, and I kind of want to be left alone. You know,
exactly.
So I would say, as far as like how it affects my daily life, you know, there's little things like, oh, I shouldn't go down this road because I think there's going to be a lot of traffic. And then, yeah, you know, I'll pull it up on my GPS and there's a ton of traffic. Little things like that, that are, you know, kind of handy for navigating life in general and quite literally. But the biggest thing is I really, really had to protect myself energetically. And so my friend Michelle taught me this really interesting technique where you visualize yourself in a big egg. In a big, like, eggshell specifically. And so since an eggshell is semi-permeable, you just allow good things to come in, and then you try to keep out all the bad shit. Now, does that always work? No, because we're still human beings, and I can't stress this enough. We have to live our lives, right? But you can certainly make a good effort at saying, okay, I'm going to cut out all of this today. I don't desire to deal with drama or any kind of you know, like any major stresses, whatever. And you just kind of encase yourself and protect yourself. And it's like, I typically make the egg as big as whatever room as I'm in, right? And just kind of visualize myself in it. And this is going to sound awful, but sometimes I just don't have time for that. And another friend of mine taught me this thing where you just, like, imagine you've got like a big black marker. And so you have like your actual physical body. And then you have like your energy that is all around your physical body, right? And you just kind of take this marker and you block your energy off. So it's just for you.
Right. Yeah.
And then you go to Target.
Yes.
or wherever
Mm-hmm.
and to a restaurant, and then you don't have to be bothered by people. And whenever I say that, I mean really truly, you know, like hit on by men or, you know, whatever. It's proven to be pretty effective for me. And sometimes I'll just say, hey, I don't have time to do all this, but can we just like not let people mess with me today?
Right. It's just the intention itself.
Yeah. Or I'll just ask my guys, I'm like, listen, like, can we just not have a lot of stress today? Can we just maybe make things pretty cool whenever I go into the store here, so I don't have to deal with people, because I do kind of naturally track people, and you do too. And I think you've gotten better with that as you've gotten older, and I certainly have, even over just like the past like several months. So that's a thing that I use. Every day. Well, no, that's bullshit. I don't use that every day. I do that when I remember.
Right.
And it's every now and again.
When it's really relevant, you're like, I need to put the protection around me.
But I do tend to do that anytime I'm doing readings. I'll, you know, if I expect to be doing a reading, I'll kind of, block it off. So.
Right. You almost have to, so that you can just sort of be, you're the channel for them. You're saying these certain things, but you're not just like absorbing it all into your being, because it's not really for you, it's usually for the person.
Yeah.
So I've been the same. I've been putting like crystal grids around me. I have this spray that my friend makes, it's called Psychic Protection, and I'll actually spray my hat with it and put it on my head. And
that's great.
Something about this really works, and it keeps my energy in for me, so I don't give too much away. But then it also lets me sort of stream things through without it like getting into my own, you know, my aura, right? It's not affecting me. I can say what I need to say without being like, oh, well, that's hard to feel that or whatever. Like, so I don't have to feel it physically in my own body to be able to communicate it, if that makes sense. But
no, that totally makes sense. Oh, you know what? Here's another thing. We were talking earlier about, you know, like the different clairs or, you know, whatever they are, right? I don't know. I just feel them and whatever that means, experience them. And so do you get the thing where, like, if somebody's in pain, that you get pains in the same place?
Oh my! I was brought that
itchy,
up earlier.
Oh shit! Like if somebody's itchy, and then you're like and then you're itchy everywhere, or like, and if it's just a little bit of itchiness, I'll get it like just like on the tips of my fingers on my left hand, and then if it's a lot, then I'll get it like all over like my chest or whatever. I get that a lot. Or if somebody's having like really bad like period cramps, I'll get those especially. Like it's like a thing, but I don't, the way at first I thought it was like me bringing on that person's energy in a bad way, like manifesting it into my body, but it's not. It's just another like, oh, this person's having back pain. That's why my back hurts right now. Or that's why my feet hurt or whatever. And so I forgot to mention that it's not just that body parts light up. It's that sometimes I'll also get their pain or their itchiness or whatever. That happens too.
Yeah.
So that's cool that you experienced that as well.
That's where I started protecting more, is because I'm like, I don't need to hear or feel everybody at, like you say, Target's thing. Or even their emotions. Like there was this guy that used to come in. I used to have an antique shop. And he would come in and he had the Eeyore thing. And his he had a messed up shoulder. And it took me a few times of him coming in, and he would leave and I would be like, wow, I am so wiped. You know, I'm like, I would start feeling depressed, and every time my shoulder would hurt. And eventually I found out like he had like rotary cuff surgery or something. And I was like, it's not me, it's him. Like, because my shoulder's fine. Like, but it only would hurt while he was there and then like 20 minutes after. But then that's when I'm like, I have to start
protecting
myself, because I don't need to feel everyone's pain. Now, if you're doing a reading and it's more relevant, then
that's different.
That's different. But like just somebody walking into your life and walking out, like I don't need to be Eeyore today just because this other person is projecting that, you know?
No, absolutely. That's very interesting. Yeah. I don't think that I necessarily, and it could just be because I've asked and, you know, been doing more protection and stuff like that. I don't necessarily feel pain whenever I'm in a store. Whenever I walk past a person, you know, I might pick up on some like emotional things, but for the most part, I just kind of, I hate to say like I shut it off, because I don't really think you can really shut it off. Some people are really good at like being on and then being off, and I'm just not. I don't really think you are either. It's not really a bad thing. It is what it is. So I haven't really experienced like random pains from other people that I know of anyway. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. But whenever I'm doing a reading on a person, I realized, oh, that's just another way of confirming like this is what's hurting on this person. But at first I was very concerned and I thought I was taking on their energy. I'm totally not. It's just I'm more concerned about taking on emotional energy than physical things because I think that because the emotional is way easier and to manifest is I mean it's emotions are very easy to throw onto other people, and you don't have to be any kind of intuitive to know that.
Yeah.
So that's what gets a little dangerous, I think.
Yeah. The Akashic Records actually has this prayer that I learned when I was taking my class, and it's literally a prayer that you can ask like to clear or eliminate any energy that's not yours. And it's so weird because there was this day and I used this prayer and like my friend had some chaos. My husband was going through something like everyone around me, like my daughter was in a weird mood. And there was a point where I'm like, I feel like I'm having anxiety. And I was like, but everything's fine, So I said the thing and I was like, okay, clear anything. And then I immediately felt fine. And it's just
cool.
It's just because I was walking through and it's interesting because my teacher was like, people are kind of crop dusting, and like, so like you might just walk through and like for that moment you're getting anxiety, but you're like, but I'm safe. I'm fine. You do all the
reel it back
checks
in
and you're like, okay, I need to set that intention to just clear. If it's not serving me, if I don't need this, then I'm just going to clear it. But it works, a lot of times.
That's awesome. Because I mean, it really, really is something to be so aware of whenever you're doing any kind of intention work or whenever you are feeling something in your body that shouldn't be there. I get a lot of anxiety whenever I pass anxious dogs. I think, or if I'm like, because I do a lot of work with rescues and fostering, and I used to be on the board of a rescue in the town I used to live in. And anyway, I get a lot of emotions from dogs.
Right.
And so sometimes I'll feel whenever they're very, very stressed out. I think I get more of those anxious feelings. Like I'll get them off people, of course. But as far as just being in a public space and feeling them, I mean, anytime there's a nervous dog that's out that does not want to be around people, it's like I don't even have to look. I'm like, oh, there was a dog over there that's very uncomfortable with where they're at right now physically. Right. Yeah. So that actually happens to me a lot, but it's more so with animals than, people, I guess. So as far as just being, again, out in a random public space.
Exactly. Yeah. So what do you consider your area of specialty to be?
I don't think I necessarily have a specialty. I wouldn't say it's animal communication, although I'm pretty good at that. I would say just straight up intuitive readings. I'm very, very proficient in card readings. That's, not an issue for me at all to like I'm very good with tarot, but I just don't. I think it's great. I think there are a lot of really, really good readers out there. I just think I'm better off when I do it on my own.
Yeah.
I just think I'm better off when I give somebody a reading without any kind of aids. So whatever intuitive stuff that I do, again, whether that's, and sometimes it can be, communicating with a person who's passed on, and sometimes it's just doing a reading for a person. I would say more present life readings because I just really haven't delved into the past life stuff. I know I mentioned this earlier, but it's not necessarily that I think I couldn't. It's just that I haven't gone down that road as much. But when I do, it'll just be another tool in the toolbox. That's really all any of these things are. Whenever I find a new thing, it's not like, oh, that's my life path. It's more of like, oh, well, that's cool. Here's another thing. I can use this later. It's quite literally just building onto your toolkit. So animal communication, that's fun. I would say doing healing work with animals is one of my specialty areas as well. Does that require communication? Yes, but it's more of, I get a lot more like their body parts also light up for me. I love working with dogs. I love working with dogs in all kinds of ways. I mean, I love kitties too. But I get a lot more dog people, for whatever reason. Probably because I work in dog rescue. But well, I say work, but volunteer, but really it's just work.
Right.
Anytime you take care of an animal, it's just work.
Right.
It's fun, but it's still work. And energy manipulation. So intuitiveness, animal healing, and energy manipulation. I mean, I can do healing work on people. That's so not a problem. Is it an area of specialty? Yeah, probably. But I prefer working with dogs
Right.
in general, as I think most people do.
Right.
If you
They're
say
just-
choose between this human being to spend time with or go pet a dog, I think most people will say the latter every time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like because you can enjoy them without like the stress and all these other things. They're giving back energy
Yeah.
to you. It's
Oh,
like symbiotic. You know?
It is symbiotic, and anytime you work with an animal or on an animal, you always approach them like this celestial being that's been around for a very long time, and even if it's like a boy orange cat with like a brain cell, right? Even if it's that, like you never ever ever approach an animal like there's something lesser. You always approach them like they are a celestial being, and you give them absolute respect, and they love that, and they will give it back to you. And you always treat them like and reincarnation is never questioned with an animal, by the way. They're like, yeah, duh. They're like, I know it sounds wild, but when I'm like, oh, I talked to a cat and it's not a problem, with whenever we talk about reincarnation, and whenever you talk to a person, it's like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. And you talk to a horse, and they're like, well, yeah,
Right.
like how many times I've died.
Right.
It's like, and how many wonderful lives I've lived and how many things I've been. And horses are very cool because I think that horses, and I've heard, now I've never worked with a dolphin before, but I've heard that dolphins communicate really, really easily with people intuitively, that they just kind of will go back and forth and talk, and whales and things. I have a friend that does things like that, and it's just wonderful. I haven't tried to have that experience yet, and I probably should. But so far I found that horses communicate well, cats communicate well, and dogs do too. But I just think it's easier to communicate with horses probably than any of the animals I've worked with. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So,
How did you and when did you discover that you could talk to animals?
okay, so I think I've probably always been able to talk to them to a certain extent, but I don't think I really started communicating until I was in my 20s. I had this dog named Zeus. I had him from 2009 to 2019. And he had a lot of problems. He had to have a lot of surgeries, and he passed away fairly early in life. So he was only 10, but he was a fairly big dog. And Zeus was one of those animals that you have that's I think he'd been a person several times in the past, and we were very, very close. And we had this relationship in which, he could just look at me and I could say, okay, well, I know exactly what he wants. And it's kind of like, whenever you have a child, and like they cry and you're like, well, they're crying because of this. And like, you just know what they're crying about. Well, he would kind of make his little whines and his little, like motions and movements. And I would say, oh, well, he wants this, he wants more, water, or, they always want snacks, whatever, right? Or he wants a walk or whatever it is. And I would say that a lot of people, they can tell based on their dog's mannerisms, like, oh, he needs this particular thing, but it wasn't just like that. It was very like, it was, I've never had that kind of experience. And I felt like almost like I could just talk to him and say, hey, can you do this thing? And I'll do this thing for you. And it was almost like he could really, really understand me. He was a very intelligent dog. He was like a pit bull, German shepherd, like cattle dog mix. He was super, super smart. And I would just straight up tell him, and people would be amazed to be in my house. I would say, okay, if you'll go into your crate, like I'll give you a treat. And I would say it like that. I wouldn't say, Zeus, go into your crate. I would say, if you will do this, I will do this.
Right.
And he would just do it. And then whenever he passed away, I had another dog that I had for a long time. I still have him. His name's Flapjack. He's just this amazing, bubbly, fun, wonderful, just this perfect, my angel dog. And so whenever Zeus passed away, it wasn't like that. With him, it was like, Flapjack, come on. Flapjack, sit. Flapjack, lay down.
You have to be specific.
Yeah, very specific, because it was, not that I haven't had several lives with him, but it's very different. So I think I discovered in my 20s, but I didn't really get into animal communication until probably about a year ago. And I just started asking.
Right.
I just said, I just kind of want to talk to you guys. can we do that?
Right.
So, and that sort of came on board at the same time as Reiki.
Okay.
So, which I think is probably the next question, but that came on board around the same time as Reiki whenever, so I took animal Reiki first, and then I discovered, oh, if I kind of form like a little golden heart and I send it to an animal and they take it, then it almost opens up like a communication pathway. And I discovered that whenever I started doing Reiki.
Oh, so they have to kind of accept.
I mean, I guess sometimes they just talk to me. I mean, like
Right.
I have a friend's cat. This cat talks to me all the time. Every time, his name's Doinker, and he's just as fun as his name sounds. And so I don't have to do anything. He's just, I remember one day I messaged my friend, her name's Jasmine, and I messaged her and I said, your cat, his whole body is white. I said, he is lit up and he is yelling, he's screaming, and I don't know what's wrong with him. I said, I don't think he's in imminent danger, but he's very upset what's going on. And she came home later that day and she said, I locked him in the bathroom on accident. And I said, your cat screamed at me for like 2 hours.
Wow.
Like, let me out. Well, he wasn't
Right.
saying let me out, but I think that's what he was trying to communicate, because he didn't tell me exactly what was going on. He was just like, I'm very upset. I'm
Right,
very,
distress
very
call.
upset, and I need Jasmine, and I'm very upset. But it didn't feel like he was going to die. It just felt
Right.
like he was really unnerved by something. And then she comes home and she was like, oh my goodness, I locked him in the bathroom. I didn't mean to close the door behind me. I didn't know he was in there.
Right.
So not always. Sometimes they just want to talk. It's like how people want to talk. Sometimes they just want to talk. But I didn't know I could do that for like a while, you know?
Right.
So that's, that was pretty cool. But yeah, it had to do with, I think whenever I started doing Reiki on animals was when I discovered that.
Okay, that's awesome. So you touched a little bit earlier about combining Reiki with some of your work with animals, but could you talk a little bit more about how you incorporate it in with all your other gifts?
Okay, so whenever I am just giving a reading to somebody, you know, that's it. I'm just doing a reading and we're talking about their relationships with other people or what's going on with them. But whenever I do Reiki, that's kind of when, again, I'm not a medical professional, but that's whenever the medical intuition comes up. And sometimes I go into physical things, and sometimes we just talk about like emotional issues and use it for like, Reiki's fantastic for emotional release. And I think that it is good for, you know, physical issues, even if it's just as far as saying, hey, you know, I desire for this to be better and I'm going to work on this, and to be more in tune with your body and aware of an issue. Does that make sense? I don't think it's any kind of substitute for going to a doctor or modern medicine by any means, but it's nice. I mean, who doesn't want to have like good energy work done on them, right? So as far as Reiki goes, it's not any kind of life path thing for me. It's just another tool in the toolkit. It was something that once I got attuned, I was like, oh, I can do this with my hands. And I always do hands off. I sit with a person, usually they're kind of sitting across from me, and I send them energy and we just talk about the emotional releases that they need to have. Or we don't say anything and I just work on their physical body, and we kind of make it like a sacred space. But it has a lot more to do with, I think, bringing up, sometimes people have medical issues and I'll just say, this will be brought up like at their next doctor's appointment or whatever, like kind of in my head, or I'll work on the person and I'll say, okay, well, this isn't my place to tell this person what's going on or what I think is going on. One, because you never want to be wrong about something that's medical like that. It's one thing to say like, hey, I kind of see that, you know, your knee's lighting up, or, you know, like looks like your stomach's very active. It's one thing to say that, and they can talk about like their food allergies or gluten intolerances or osteoarthritis or whatever. But I think that bringing up really major things, that I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to say in my head, not where, you know, obviously not in a way that they can hear. And I'll just say this will be brought up at their next doctor's appointment. And I try to put in that energy just for healing for that person or whatever they need. Or sometimes I even do Reiki to help someone cross over. And honestly, from the experiences I've had with Reiki, I have a friend who does it the way that I do. And again, I kind of call it, and it's not that I think I'm just way better than other people, but it's just not regular Reiki. I just kind of call it Reiki Plus or Reiki Premium, whatever it is, because there's so much psychically that's going on whenever I do that kind of work as well. So, and that's when I experience more of physical pain, or itchiness or whatever, which I would argue that the itchiness is far worse than the physical pain, because
Right.
being itchy is always uncomfortable.
Right.
Especially if you're working with somebody with like major allergies. It's like, you know.
Right.
So how that incorporates, it's just like just another thing. It's just another thing that I can use to help people and help animals. And to maybe help a person through a particular situation or a very tough time in their life, or you know, maybe it's just a little bit of good energy that they need to get through the day.
Right.
But I'd like to think it's more than that. It's I think whenever you open somebody up to the fact that you can kind of use energy to go in and heal their body, and you give them advice on like, well, think of this and try, you know, like pushing like white light through your body or wherever you feel pain, and kind of like getting that energy unstuck. And obviously going to the doctor is very, very important in all this. I think that can be very empowering for a person.
So are you looking to expand and learn any new skill sets in the future?
I'm very rarely looking, and I'm more so just along for the ride, and I'll see something that sounds very interesting. Like I've heard about light language recently, and I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll go down that road, and that'll be another tool in the toolkit, right? So I don't think there's just any one thing that I want to expand on. I just think it's all interesting. I think Reiki's interesting. I don't think it's a cure-all, but I do think it's pretty useful. And you know, of course, working with animals, that's fantastic. I'm interested in really any healing modality that has to do with energy work, like Marconics.
Oh yeah,
I heard about Marconics.
On it.
Okay, so I was at this fair. I was at the Crystalline Light Expo last year as a vendor, and I kept seeing the word macaroni on my left hand side, and I was like, I'm not hungry, and I'm not seeing macaroni. I'm just seeing the word. Like I'm not seeing the food. I'm seeing the word, and I learned later that there was this lady, and there's not a lot of people in Knoxville who do this. She does Marconics, and I was so. I didn't even realize it was coming from her. I just knew it was on my left-hand side, and she was on my left-hand side, and I didn't realize until later after the event. I was like, oh, Marconics, macaroni.
Right.
And I know that sounds so silly, but that was the closest thing I had in my lexicon, like in my vocabulary, to Marconics. And so I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of whatever I stumble into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love how you're just open and you're just, you know, along for the ride, and the things that you feel called to, you'll seek them out or, you know, play with those ideas. I love that that you can just be open like that. That's so cool.
And just, I mean, I don't think there's any one, you know, I don't want to get caught up on like, oh, here's this one cool thing. You know, like when I'm in my 60s, maybe I'll do acupuncture. I don't know.
Right.
You know, maybe. It just depends on what feels right at that point.
Right, right.
I'm pretty open to whatever, whatever, as long as it's, you know, sensible and reasonable and seems helpful.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So what are some of the services that you offer, and how can people contact you for a session?
So some of the services that I offer, I do offer Reiki. I offer it on both humans and animals. And with that, it's really like a Reiki / reading kind of thing. It's not just me running energy. I give them, you know, information, intuitive hits, things like that. So, and I do offer like Oracle tarot card readings, but I really feel the most comfortable when it comes to readings doing just straight up intuitive readings. So I offer intuitive readings, just psychic intuitive readings. I offer medium work. So if somebody does want to contact someone or just receive messages from a loved one who's passed over, and they often come up in readings anyway. It's almost always when I'm doing an intuitive read by to someone, I'll get either a member of their family who's passed, or, you know, their divine team or whatever. There's always some spirit guide. If you just kind of lump the term, you know, into spirit guide, there's always a spirit guide that has something to say.
Right.
and yeah, I offer Reiki services to both humans and animals. And that's, I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, it's sort of I'm a full service psychic, I guess.
I love that.
It's like you don't just come for an oil change,
Right.
like we're a full service mechanic here.
Right.
So yeah, I kind of do. Well, I do all of the things, but I think it's really important whenever I do energy work, that the person understands that it's so sometimes it's hard to be prepared for the things that come up, but I don't ever bring things up that I don't think a person is ready for,
Right.
at all. And a lot of the time people are just fine. And sometimes they have a big emotional release. And it makes me feel quite useful to humanity to help a person through a particularly rough patch. Even though I claim to be fairly misanthropic, you still, no matter what, it's very, very important to love people and to love people through situations like that and try to help them. And so my business phone number, my business name is actually, it's Flapjacks Curios and Readings by Kimmie. I just use a fun name, and instead of my full first and last name, but so Flapjacks Curios and Readings by Kimmie. And my phone number is 865-224-6858. And I do have a Facebook page at Flapjacks Curios and Readings by Kimmie. Flapjack is my dog, who's wonderful and the face of my business, and maybe a little difficult sometimes. But I don't have a website right now, but I probably should do that at some point in my life.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it'll happen right when it's supposed to.
I mean, whenever I initiate it,
Right.
I guess. Right.
All right. Well, we'll add any links and your number
Yeah.
in the description too. So
Yeah, that's fine. And I do have a profile on like evolve.net. A friend of mine actually started a website for people who do this kind of work.
okay.
So I'll send you that as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting experience, and it was really nice to meet you and to spend time with you both yesterday and today.
Yeah. I loved getting to know you too. Your energy's so cool, and I just love that I'm going to get to share this with so many people, and I just really appreciate you taking the time. So,
Well, thank you for having me. This has been my first podcast experience, and hopefully there will be more.
yeah,
So,
hopefully.
yeah, whatever the universe has to offer, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.